Are you gonna?
I already said my name. I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Eli. Who am I? I'm Eli Sands.
It's Senora Sands to you.
Oh boy.
And you're listening to Deep Cut.
It's actually Profe Sands, but okay.
Oh, Profe Sands. I fucked that. I can't. Whenever we have a movie in a different language, I somehow always end up mimicking that language on the episode.
We were just talking about the potential of getting canceled. Seems like a solid way to do it, right?
Yes.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss the director's life and career to bring context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
Hello, welcome to a new director series. And before we get into our discussion on the work of Marilou Diaz-Abaya and her 1998 seminal film, José Rizal, just a few things to remind you of. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to give us a rating or review where you get and listen to podcasts. You can also keep up with us at Deep Cut Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd. And if you want to talk about anything with us, feedback, talk about movies, tell us to watch something, read something,
life advice,
eat something, tell us what to do. We'll say yes on our Discord server, to which you'll find links in the description below. Okay, here we go. Today on the podcast, we are introducing the work of Marilou Diaz-Abaya, one of the most important directors of the second golden age of Filipino cinema, and diving into her epic historical biopic, José Rizal. We are going to be going back to our podcast roots by doing a full cut and dry, popular/deep cut set of episodes. So today we are doing our popular pick. Released in 1998, the film José Rizal tells the story of the Filipino national hero and writer who fought for the country's independence from Spanish colonial rule in the late 19th century. Before we dive into this big pool of director and film context, I want to get your initial reactions. So, what did you both think of José Rizal? Ben, who finished last, can go first.
I thought it was a good looking movie, but a very strong watch this in class vibes from this film.
Mm-hmm.
And that's maybe my biggest knock against it. Like, it feels very much like a biopic movie about a famous person you should know about in school. And José Rizal is that person for the Philippines that everyone is supposed to know about. And knowing that apparently there's a law in the Philippines that every child must read both of his books and learn about José Rizal in, I think, high school in the Philippines. It really is that movie for that context, that you probably put this on after you finish reading the books and learned about José Rizal, and then kind of are able to see his life dramatized through film.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think the film falls into a lot of the pitfalls of the general biopics that are being made usually, where it's just too much information and like kind of going through a lot of life stuff. And it's not selective enough to kind of be an interesting examination of his life, and also an interesting dramatic and interesting way of thinking about how to make his life dramatic. Like, it is a dramatization, yes. Like, the scenes are dramatized, but they're not, to me, dramatic, because I feel like the film doesn't really figure out what is here that's really interesting from a film standpoint. From a history class standpoint, it's like, okay, because it shows you the events that kind of lead up to the kind of person that he is. But I feel like it needed just to be cut down to like find out what exactly is important about his life that makes this an interesting movie and an interesting story. So yeah, I think that's just kind of how I feel about it.
Yeah, honestly, a lot of your, I guess, pushbacks against the film, I sort of fully agree with. And I'm definitely like the least biopic-y kind of person.
Mm.
So this was not in my wheelhouse at all. But I don't know. Yeah, I will expand on my thoughts later.
Mm.
But Eli, what did you think of Jose Rizal?
Yeah. So Marilou Diaz-Abaya is, I believe, the first, if not the second, director we've covered who I hadn't heard of before the point we began the show.
I've
So
never heard of
it's
it
really
either.
exciting. Yeah, it's really
Same.
exciting to start in on a totally new director to me. And immediately I was very taken by the very self-assured camera movement that's very graceful and gives a lot of urgency to what it's showing right off the bat. And as Ben said, very compellingly photographed, really striking imagery. I also really like the lead performance from Cesar Montano. And I think for me, the history class vibes come through in a bit of a hagiographic portrayal of Rizal and a lack of central perspective from him that feels very nuanced. But where the script doesn't provide that, I think Montano's performance does. I also really enjoy movies that move through decades very quickly and give you a very big sweep of time in a country. Thinking of like Zhang Yimou's To Live, which I really enjoy. I also was thinking of Sardar Udham, another anti-colonial movie from India that I spoke about a little bit on our 2021 in review episode. It definitely follows that history class mode, the anti-colonial film mode. It has quote unquote good Spaniard characters in the movie in a way that maybe doesn't feel super useful, but I found it to be an enjoyable watch, and I'm definitely excited to see Marilou Diaz-Abaya's deep cut pick from you, Wilson, because if this is the starting point, then I'm very interested.
Yeah. And just so you both know that Jose Rizal is like at the bottom of my Marilou Diaz-Abaya ranking right now.
Like
And
this
I'm
feels
sort of-
like the film you
Yeah.
make because you want to make some cash. Like she was just making some money with this one. This is the
Yeah.
feeling I'm getting. You know what I mean? Like it's like, let me do this big biopic that everyone's gonna see. Like literally, I think the entirety of the Filipino student population probably has seen this film. Like probably.
You can see so many letterbox reviews of this movie being like, watch this for class, but enjoyed it.
Of course.
But if it is a movie that is that kind of sort of required viewing, then it does have a sharp edge in what
Yeah.
it wants to say.
Oh,
in a certain
definitely.
sense, which is cool.
And I think it's sort of, for me, it seems like a top tier biopic because of how subversive its sort of approach to like telling his story is. And I think
Structurally, like order of events.
order of events. And I think that is to do with Ricky Lee and the other screenwriters and the way that they wanted to tackle Jose Rizal as a figure. And also there is something to do with how, I guess, controversial some aspects of his life are and how they didn't want to really anger folks in how they depicted his life.
Yeah, I do have to say on that the scene where he is flirting with Leonor, they really remind you like 5 or 6 times of their cousins. Like, they really push that button hard.
They just cousins who
What
care
if my
for each
father
other.
walks in? What, he'll just see 2 cousins caring for each other.
They just care for each other a lot. And they like to
Hilarious.
I can't argue
make
with
each
that.
other happy.
Apparently.
They like to give themselves that feeling of happiness.
Such an iconic scene.
Yeah, for real.
I had to say though, like I think from the top, like I think what's an interesting kind of pairing to this film, and I guess there's a lot of films like this where it's like the biopics about the figure being interviewed by another person.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And then I think
Jackie?
this one, okay, Jackie's one, and I think another one I was thinking about is like A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Is also that,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I think those are like interesting entry points into Jose Rizal. So if you watched either of those, that this might be interesting to look at in looking at how the narrative plays out and like how that kind of structure works. Because this is a pretty common structure that's used for the biopic.
Good point. Yeah.
Okay, so my turn. I saw this movie 2 times, and I think the first time I was like not into it, so I stopped it. And I like stopped and started this movie probably like 5 times to get to the end. It's a 2 hour, like nearly 3 hour long movie. And I was not feeling it and I was not into the flow of it. And also things were just going on in my life where I couldn't like devote 3 hours, a full 3 hour chunk to finishing it. But I was probably like 3 movies into my Marilou Diaz-Abaya adventure. And I was still able to pick out the really strong directorial choices behind the camera and just a really strong eye and also a great corralling of like moving performances within the film. And I think that was very, very apparent. And even within this massive big budget movie, she's able to really shine through as a director, which is reason enough to bring this on the podcast. But yeah, I really wanted to, for a really long time, get into Filipino directors because, well, my mom's from the Philippines. And I think similarly, I talked about using cinema to discover or to rediscover Hong Kong and my love for Hong Kong with Johnny To and Wong Kar-wai and all those other directors. And I think that has started to happen for me, albeit a little bit later, for Filipino directors. And because I'm so amazed by these directors, especially those in the second golden generation of the 70s to the 80s, because I'm so amazed by their direction, and I also feel like as directors themselves, they are deep cuts. Not many people internationally know of these directors. I wanted to use this podcast as a platform to maybe like bring to light these directors and these films and encourage people to check them out because they're incredible movies in there. And yeah, just great works. So this is going to be only the first director in a series of directors, hopefully, that I'll get to bring to you guys on the podcast. And I'm just very, very excited to embark on this Filipino cinema journey with you guys. So before I get into Diaz-Abaya's biography, I do want to point out this quote from a book I've been reading. So this book is called Early Cinema in Asia, and it is written by this experimental doc filmmaker slash film researcher, Nick Diocampo. He's Filipino, and in the introduction, he talks about how to view early cinema in Asia. And when cinema emerged internationally, a lot of these Asian countries were under colonial rule. So he's talking about where to start when thinking about a national cinema. And I'm just going to read this quote here. The Asian cinemas we know today did not come from nowhere, nor did they indigenously emerge. The dynamics of colonial and national forces determining a cinema's identity and functionality continue to blur and affect each other far beyond the political demarcations set by phenomenal events like granting a country its independence. And I think just trying to reframe our minds when thinking about cinemas from Asia or cinemas from countries that have been colonized, because there is a direct need to convey stories of being under colonial rule and like the pain that causes, and a lot of like societal problems just stem from that. And I think that's why Diocampo states in this book that it's really hard for us to separate like films created in that country from a sort of national cinema. Whereas with the States or with the UK, when you have sort of you live in freedom like the entire like history of the country, most of the time, there's not that like collective memory that artists need to build upon. Yeah, and that's just my preface into getting into Marilou Diaz-Abaya. Okay.
I will admit that I had questions as I watched about that idea of a national style and how much Marilou Diaz-Abaya is in conversation with that, even just from a camera direction standpoint. Thank you for sharing that.
Before I get into this director biography, I do want to shout out Monty, who's a listener of the podcast and who provided us with a lot of resources, or provided me with a lot of resources, including this scan from a book called Direct Essays on Filipino Filmmakers and this essay on Marilou Diaz-Abaya, which I basically like just grabbed all this director information from. And this essay is written by Gil Cuito. So yeah, thank you, Monty. And yeah, this is the benefits of having a Discord and having a community.
With cool people like Monty.
Exactly. And it's a collective effort. So Marilou Diaz-Abaya was born in Quezon City on March 30th in 1955. She lived a very privileged childhood. She was a child of two lawyers. They had a very progressive family. Her mom worked through raising 7 children and became the first woman vice president of the Philippine National Bank. Although her parents were lawyers, Marilou and her siblings grew up surrounded by arts. Their home had a lot of priceless paintings from national artists. The children were forced to take up piano, ballet, theater, and even though Marilou wasn't good at any of these, she realized that they helped her later on in the future. She was never really a film buff, and I think she said that she was really cornered into filmmaking in a lot of different ways. But first of all, when going to college at her Catholic tertiary institution, the Assumption Convent, she wanted to study Asian studies in the history department, but the history department was full, and she was sort of forced to enroll in communication arts. And that's where her passion for theater acting and film began and grew from there. And another one of these influences in her life was meeting her boyfriend and future husband, Manolo Abaya. And she would say that every time that we'd go on a date, a still camera or a Super 8 camera would always be sitting in the car. While walking in the park, he'd be shooting me. He'd be shooting everything. I found it very annoying.
Yeah, I think I'm guilty of over photographing friends. Similarly, I relate to you, Manolo.
And they both really wanted to get married. Well, I guess she really wanted to get married, being raised in this very like Catholic frame of mind. But Manolo wanted to go to film school in London. So she had to wait. And she also wanted to go to film school in London, but her parents said they can't live in the same city because they're not married yet. So I think from this, you're already getting an idea of how Filipino society had these very like strict rules. And I think that will come into play later on when we watch the next film that we cover on the podcast.
And honestly, that bit about Jose Rizal and his, as they call her, mistress, Josephine, and the idea that they're not married, but that they're living in the grace of the Lord, that felt very like brushed over quickly. And I wondered if there was more socially to the framing of that moment.
Yes, I think there's definitely stuff there. And like, I guess whether or not like she lived with him or I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of debate.
Cared for her a lot. Like he cares for his cousin.
Yeah. So instead of going to film school in London, Marilou decides to go to film school in the US, and she enrolls in Loyola Marymount University, another Catholic institution. And there she got her master's in film and TV. And after they finished their courses, they got married and lived in London for a bit, where Marilou continued her studies at the London International Film School. So you're already getting this idea of Marilou Diaz-Abaya growing up in some sort of like privilege. She had these access to these institutions and she was allowed to study film. After spending time in London, where Marilou was really not enjoying herself, they went back home, and the Abayas with their theater friends set up an indie film company called Cine Filipinas. So they went about adapting this work into their first feature film, and their friends all took up different roles in the sound department and producing. Manolo wanted to be a cinematographer and edit, and the way that Marilou puts it was that the only role that was unfilled at the end was the director. And at the time, Marilou was 3 months pregnant and sort of initially resisted, but soon gave in. And she said herself that it would be an adventure.
Sorry, she
so
directed this movie while pregnant?
yeah, her first feature. Yes, yes. And there's this incredible essay that she writes where she writes about directing pregnant and how she felt doing that. And it's very beautiful. I think if I find a way, I'll be able to like link it in the show notes, but I will definitely share it with you too. So the film wasn't a success. It was sort of like a box office bomb, but I think it put Marilou and her co-creators on the map. And through a local beer house that was frequented by indie filmmakers, she met some producers, and she also met Ricky Lee, who was probably, like, aside from her husband, the most important collaborator that she had in her career. And Ricky Lee would go on to co-write 10 of her 21 features, including her next film, which was Brutal. And Brutal was her first big hit at the Metro Manila Film Fest and sort of cemented her in the filmmaking world in the Philippines as someone to watch. And that was just her second feature. I just caught Brutal yesterday, and it's really incredible. I would encourage you all to watch it. It becomes the first part of like a 3 film series that has like 2 syllables ending with all, like Brutal, Carnal, and Moral, talking about women in Philippine society, and the trials and tribulations that they go through just to be like living in that society. So the director Ishmael Bernal, who directed classic works like Bernal, yeah.
Brutal.
Yeah.
Carnal, Moral.
Bernal, yes. Was really enamored by her work, and he sort of became Abaya's mentor over the rest of his life, basically. And from him, she says, she learned to love art is to embrace poverty and uncertainty and not to be afraid of the uncertainties of an artist's lifestyle. So I think after that, she was able to like really fully devote herself to filmmaking. And she made movies through the course of the 70s and the 80s in that second golden age of Filipino cinema. And this was a time of moral flux because it was during the time of dictatorial rule and with this military dictatorship by President Ferdinand Marcos. That name should not be unfamiliar to you guys now because his son's in office, which is sort of wild. Yeah. I have this interesting quote from the production designer that worked on her film Carnal, sort of comparing her to the other 2 big directors of the time, Lino Broca and Ishmael Bernal. He says, if Lino Broca was more like a captain leading troops and Bernal was an autocratic professor, Abaya was more like a sister or best friend sharing an adventure. She never berated an actor in front of others and would always quietly talk about matters with them. And she was always open to collaboration on story ideas from her crew members. Yeah. And I think she said about this time of making films like at the height of political oppression, Abaya says, why was this period so rich in filmic expression? She says, because both artist and spectator were in a state of ferment. I believe that in times of deprivation, you're hungry not only for food or the basics, but also for expression or for a release of anger. And I think that sort of ties back into my idea about national cinema being one of collective trauma or collective historical memory. And just the need to create those films rather than the want. And thus, following the end of martial law, there sort of was a stagnation in films being produced because I guess there wasn't really a need to create films with really like punchy social commentary. And She decided to work in television in the 80s, and that allowed her to raise her kids and have a regular family life. And her husband also turned to work in advertising and didn't end up working in films after that. But studios began calling, producers began calling, and before long, she found herself back on a film set, and she realized that she missed it a lot. She said after her first take, she wept, and she was so happy after she said print. She printed the first take. From the 80s onwards was the period in which she made José Rizal.
I see this distinct 10-year gap in her filmography.
Yeah. And then I think after that, she became a more commercially minded filmmaker. So I think you really see two different sides to her. And I think that's what I'm trying to do with choosing this popular pick and this deep cut pick. So before I get into José Rizal, I want to talk a little bit about her later in life. So in 2007, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she dialed back on filmmaking and established a film school in a lot that her family owned. But prior to that, she has always been teaching filmmaking. So she really had a passion for teaching. And I think that's something that Eli and I were simpatico.
Yes, sir.
She said, as young as 8, I would gather my siblings and house help, mount a green blackboard in front of them, and with real chalk mark important details of lessons I learned in class earlier in the day. I always tell my students to learn as much as they can, then give everything away to anybody interested. This way, they'll always have room to learn even more. So she was described by her students as very motherly as a teacher. She would always call her students anak, which meant child. She fostered a lot of really important directors, production designers, cinematographers, editors, and screenwriters through her schools. I think her school is still active today. I'm not quite sure, but I think it is still active today. And I think one important teaching tidbit that I really loved from this book, one of her students said, she said it was very important to express the significant human experience. The abbreviation would be SHE in any storytelling. So every story is about love and how that love transforms us. So that being the basis of any film that you want to make. With her cancer diagnosis, she was very open with the public because she was already a very big public figure at the time. And she was open about the trials and tribulations with cancer. She passed away in late 2012 at the age of 57. So that's still really young. And she, I guess if she lived a really long life, she had a lot more students to teach and features to give to the world. Her son said she was meticulous to the end. She planned and prepped her 4-day vigil and burial. She chose speakers and contacted them herself. She specified which kind of bouquets of flowers that was going to be placed at her funeral. And her son said that was our joke, that she was directing until the very end. Great.
Wow,
okay.
That's incredibly bittersweet.
Yes. But she had a lot to give, and she gave a lot already. And I think that's really incredible.
Like, in a way, she brings up like a whole generation of Filipino filmmakers, in a sense.
She does. Yeah.
I like this idea that every story is about love. Like, it seems a little bit trite, but I think about it, I'm like, you could make an argument about almost maybe every movie. Yeah, like you could make that argument. Even like the most pessimistic, sinister film, you could probably still find a way to make it make sense. Right, because I think that's still the most inviting emotion to use as part of any dramatic or comedic storytelling. Yeah, I kind of like that.
Yeah. I sense Eli is pushing back against that idea, and I also am like, oh, is it there? Like, I don't even see it. It might not even be there in all of Diaz-Abaya's own works, so I don't know.
I believe it.
Okay.
Move on.
On to context for José Rizal. So José Rizal, if you don't know, is one of the most well-known public historical figures in the Philippines. He is on the peso coin. There are streets named after him. There's like a whole section of Manila where he was executed. Like, it's his José Rizal Park. He is a very, very, very well-known household historical name. And prior to Diaz-Abaya's biopic of him, there had been a few biopics on Jose Rizal made with the first generation, the first golden age of Filipino cinema directors, and also adaptations of his 2 books. And I'm going to say the books now. The first book is called Noli Me Tangere, and the second book is...
Sorry.
Thanks, teacher.
Do you want to...
Noli Me Tangere and what's the second one called?
El Filibusterismo?
Yeah, you got it.
I got it. Thank you. I passed Spanish
Say
in
that second
the
title,
first grade.
El filibusterismo.
Ooh, my hair. Oh my got goosebumps.
I think Spanish is such a beautiful language. It flows really well. I feel like it like sits in my mind the way like Norwegian sits in my mind. I just really like how it sounds. Yeah, that's on Spanish.
What properties do you enjoy that have Norwegian spoken in them?
Oh, interesting question. Yeah, like I don't think I've thought about Norwegian cinema or TV in my life.
Watched?
Wow. If you weren't around me around what was it, like 2016, 2017,
yeah.
I would be talking your ear off on Yuli Andam's seminal series, Scam. Message me on Discord if you want to learn more.
If you ever want to see a person make their personality a TV show, time travel to 2016 in Connecticut. Find Wilson. TV show
that's
body.
Brutal.
It was a good time, guys. It was a good time.
I enjoyed how you enjoyed it.
I did enjoy it. I didn't watch it too.
Wait till we do a 3-episode stint on that series.
Please.
That is too much. Watch it. I'll stop.
The project came to Abaya in the middle of her career, so she had already established herself as a household name as a director. This production company, big production company, it's still alive today, GMA. Their producers went to Abaya with this biography, and it would cost 80 million pesos, so that's $2 million, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it was more than 10 times the price of an average film made in the Philippines at that time. And it also became the most expensive film to be shot in the Philippines. And
is that $2 million $1998?
I guess, yeah. I don't know what that is in inflation.
So
do the math.
Do the math.
So that's 3,700,000. Wait, he said that poorly. That's $3,700,000 today.
Yeah, and that's like I feel like you could.
It's all
tell
about exchange rate, man. It's all about standard of living.
Yeah. It is standard of living. Yes.
Yep.
So if you want to make a film for cheap, go to no, please don't do that. Do not outsource your filmmaking to Southeast Asia. Do not do that. I caught myself before I said it.
Go exploit.
So she had initially refused the project, and another filmmaker that Ben is sort of familiar with, Mike DeLeon, was already working on a Jose Rizal biopic and actually shot some of it, but sort of found himself at an impasse and then backed out.
He was like such a Mike DeLeon move.
Yeah, but Mike DeLeon would make a film called Bayaning Third World, which is about 2 filmmakers trying to make a Jose Rizal biopic. So I think he at least got something out of this experience.
Yeah. I think Mike's too much of a kind of a renegade-ish filmmaker to like confine himself to a commercial-ish undertaking of this Jose Rizal story.
Yes.
Yeah, and you can kind of see that just from the construction of Bayaning Third World that he doesn't want to go at the story in a kind of straight-laced fashion.
Exactly. Yeah. Whereas Diaz-Abaya sort of wants to like work within the commercial parameters and then try to elevate from within.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
And I think she succeeds.
The GMA producers found her again, and she said she would do it on 2 conditions. The first condition would be to scrap all the footage that Mike DeLeon shot and start again, and from a new script from screenwriter Ricky Lee, and to change the lead to Cesar Montano. And she said this was a scary project for her. She had looked up to Rizal and read his novels and poems in its original Spanish and sort of found it really hard to film a biography of the most like beloved Filipino historical figure of all time. And GMA really wanted to make the definitive film on Jose Rizal. So she was still really, really hesitant, but her son, Marco, who was studying at Jose's alma mater at the time, Ateneo, pushed her to make the film. She said she was thinking about future generations when making this decision. So there was a lot of life facts that remained up for debate that her and the screenwriters wanted to sort of like work around or work with. So was he reformist or did he actually support the revolution? Was one of them. So the strategy that they took, which I think made it a lot harder, but actually made the film a lot more interesting, was to write the film from the point of view of Rizal as an artist or an intellectual in a web of scenes from both his life and the novels that he wrote and explore the connection between them. So there's these two jumping off points. So Rizal's time writing in Ghent and also his time being imprisoned right before his execution, where he talks to his defense attorney. She developed a 3-month syllabus for the lead actor Montano that included history, politics, poetry, fencing, penmanship, and Spanish diction. The whole team was required to read Rizal's 2 novels and would quiz each other every Friday on facts.
She started a classroom.
She was a teacher at heart. They used CGI for the first time in Filipino cinema, so they were able to get the old city of Intramuros, the buildings there, which have been like torn down during World War II.
I had no idea there was CGI, except for maybe the moth that flies.
Yes.
At the plane.
Moth, yes.
But I had no idea there was any other CGI in it.
Me too. It was really seamless. I was really surprised.
Wow.
And the film actually opened to mixed critical reception. So some say it was dull and some others calling it a masterpiece, but it won 17 awards. That's like the most awards that like ever was won at the Metro Manila Film Festival, including Best Picture, Director, Screenplay, and Actor. And it went on to become one of the most decorated films ever from the Philippines. It also became hugely profitable. And it is one of Abaya's most internationally seen films, played at Busan, Tokyo, Madrid, Chicago, and New York film festivals. And that is the reason why it is the most popular pick. And also the fact that people continue to watch it every year because it is assigned as part of a history class syllabus, maybe. Even though on Letterboxd it says Moral has the most views, I think this actually has the most eyes on it. And this is why we are covering Jose Rizal on this episode. Okay, that is my very long director introduction and movie introduction, but I hope you guys were interested and it made you want to explore her filmography more.
Definitely.
I'm curious about this AL trilogy. I don't know what to call it. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
we're
You
going to
can call
catch
me
one of
Al.
them
Catch one of them. I'm
next
curious.
week.
Like Carnal played recently, I think, at the archive. I missed it. It was like before I started working there.
Yeah, all 3 got restorations, albeit, okay, this is my one qualm with this Philippine National Film Registry, but their restorations look like shit. They cannot, like, I don't know if it's the source material, but I feel like the colors are all warpy, but I think that's part of how they preserve the film itself and like time
Don't tell
worn.
me this was a restoration.
No,
this was not a restoration.
I don't think
But
Jose Rizal
Moral
has been
would've-
restored. Yeah.
No, it hasn't been. It hasn't been.
Which is feels surprising because it's the one that makes the most money.
exactly.
You can sell the 4K restoration to all the schools one more time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Feels
but I think
surprising.
they're trying to do like the earlier stuff first, so the 70s and 80s stuff
Right.
first. And
Probably
because
because
this was
it's in
made
more
late
critical
90s.
condition.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the thing that like stood out the most from your background was the talk about the inclusion of the dramatization of his 2 novels within the story and narrative of the film.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, if anything, from a storytelling standpoint, that those parts are the biggest narrative gambit of the film and like whether that will work, right? And obviously, Rizal's novels are partially about his own life, so it kind of fits into a biopic about his life and how it kind of dovetails, but it's a very interesting part of the film. It does also lengthen the film by
It
a
does.
significant amount. But yeah, I was wondering what you guys thought about those parts.
Being totally new to Rizal as a figure and of course his work, I enjoyed having that in there, but I can see how knowing his work it would feel overstuffed, or like if you've read those books, you may not need to see so much dramatization of passages from the books.
Mm.
And I will say that the sequence towards the end when his character Simone, formerly Ibarra, enters Rizal's cell and starts
Does that
talking with
not
him,
work
I was like,
for you?
not
That
a
really
ton for me.
worked for me.
It didn't ruin anything for me, but I was like, oh, okay. Like,
I'm like kind of like lukewarm on it. It was like kind of a nice surprise. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, let's go here right now. And like, it's definitely reaching for something to do something like that, right?
Yeah.
And I wasn't
I think
expecting
the
it at all.
decision to hold
Yeah.
it back and only use it in that one point
Of course.
made it very strong. And I think,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I think the final 30 minutes of this film are where Diaz-Abaya and Montano give their best work. And I think it becomes very emotionally driven. And I was able to like just really be immersed in those last few moments with Rizal. And
that's
Yeah.
interesting because I feel kind of the opposite, where the sharper work to me is earlier in the picture, where Montano is not doing so much overt emoting, but the way he reacts to things very subtly and slightly conveys a lot and communicates a similar amount of pain, doing less and hiding more, but somehow transmitting it to the camera. He's quite remarkable on screen.
He's a handsome man too.
Yes, he is.
yes, he is. What's that
I think-
skincare routine?
Good
I
mustache.
feel like I think my main struggle with it is that the depth that you get from the character is that the story is trying to tell you that, oh, you know, he takes a while to kind of warm up to the idea of being the symbol of rebellion,
Yes.
right? But from the very first frame, he already is a symbol of rebellion for a viewer and
Yes.
for most of the other characters, because you're kind of going at the story from a hindsight point of view. And the film doesn't really give you a different entry point into this because it's a film that occurs in flashbacks.
Yeah, and furthermore, Ben, you earlier highlighted how the structure of this movie is unknown character interviews very well-known character, which
Mhm.
simultaneously gets us close to a character's perspective and holds them at a little bit of a distance. If the audience surrogate is the interviewer, in this case, Taviel, the lawyer who is assigned to Rizal, then we're at a distance. But because there's this flashback structure, it simultaneously also asks us to step into his subjectivity.
Yeah.
And the cuts to those flashbacks are motivated not always by Rizal's explanation,
Yeah.
but sometimes by his reminiscence,
Yeah.
just like a
So-
look on his face.
It's in a way like the device of the interviewer is not really used in that way. It's just there
Yeah.
because it's a thing that happened because he was interviewed by a defense counsel from Spain. It's less about how the Spanish person comes to understand Rizal, but more of like, here's a person that heard the story, but then you don't really filter the story through his eyes.
No,
Not
it's
that
more
that's
about
necessarily-
Rizal relaying himself.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a better way of doing it, but it's just that then the device of him doesn't really do much for the story and like how the story is conveyed in an interesting way, at least. You know what I mean? Like, we don't understand how does Taviel change, because I felt like it was quite sudden how he changes to like kind of like
Yeah, but I don't think
being
it was
quite-
important, right? Like,
Yeah,
I
it's
just
not
don't think
important,
that's
but-
like the crux of.
But that's to me what's interesting in this. Like, that's what's dramatic in this, you know, like the argument of like, how do I get this person to understand me, Rizal, and to come to my side of the story? Like, to me, that's interesting, you know?
Well, the other thing is that I'm thinking about how Wilson in the background section mentioned that it's unclear to historians how closely aligned with the revolutionaries Rizal really was. And I think the confusion around that and the leaps of assumption that the movie makes about his connections to revolutionaries, one, is a little bit contradictory within the text.
Mhm.
There are different parts that go back and forth and make it hard to access what exactly Rizal's perspective was. And also, it muddies up, to your point, Ben, what the utility of characters like Taviel and other characters who come to know Rizal, like the young Filipino man who works in the jail building, what their utility is becomes unclear narratively.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the public pushback against Rizal as a historical figure is that he was a revolutionary figure that was very loved by the or not like abided by like Spanish rule a lot, and didn't stated himself was not a revolutionary and did not join revolutionary forces. So a lot of people now are being like, why are we holding him to such a high pedestal when he basically didn't really do much?
So does the movie punch up his radicalism in some ways?
It's possible.
It could be. I'm not too sure, but I think that is the thing that Ricky Lee and the other screenwriters were trying to contend with when writing this. And I think that was the challenge that they had when portraying his political leanings.
Am I right to say that generally Rizal's participation in rebellion is really as a symbol due to the nature of his novels?
Yes.
Right? Because he doesn't necessarily do anything. He just expressed an idea, right?
Yes.
And then like that idea was able to increase the fervor for rebellion because of the content of his novels, which were fiction novels, right?
Yes.
So that's actually really interesting about how that historically makes him into a rebellion symbol.
Exactly.
Despite not being a key figure in the physical rebellion itself.
Right.
And of course, his death makes him into a martyr as well for those ideas.
Yes. And I feel like that is another challenge posed to Lee and the other writers, because a lot of the stuff that happens in his life is not like actionable stuff. It's stuff that he wrote. So it's like how to translate that, just thinking and writing, into interesting filmmaking is, I think, a thing that you have to jump through. And I think by including the characters in the novels and the novels themselves in the film, I think they're able to make it more interesting to the viewers.
So it's not known how close he was to the Katipunan, the group led by Andres Bonifacio. In real life, it's not known if Rizal was close to them.
I don't know if I can answer that.
We don't know. I think for now, we don't know. Like for us, we don't know.
Well, clearly.
If we didn't realize, we don't know anything.
So, So there was an uprising that he condemned, and even though the members of the Katipunan had made him their honorary president and used his name as a cry. So it's basically what happened. Like, he denounced them publicly, but they still claimed him. But he said he always believed that a peaceful stance was the best way to avoid like further suffering in the country, which is also what was stated in the film. Yeah. I think it's a really interesting dynamic, and I think the film delves into it a little bit, but I think doesn't want to like really anger either side of the debate, because it is like the José Rizal film, so I don't think it can make big punchy statements like that.
Yeah.
I think that's how it kind of like falls into this biopic kind of pitfalls, that because it needs to venerate the figure, like then it's not able to do more interesting narrative like gambits to like interrogate what the figure really is and what the figure means, and like how the figure is changed through this veneration, right? Because by the time she makes this, Rizal is already like a huge historical figure for the Philippines, and so it's like, how do you go at this in a way that is interesting without going like about respecting the idea that Rizal is venerated by the Philippines? Yeah,
it's like tough situation to like agree to yourself to like do this.
This is what biopics are like, but this is like one of the more like big people to cover. Other biopics, I think, don't have that much responsibility.
Yes,
because this one is big. This is like an entire nation. It's not like a pop star or anything. You know what I mean? Like that one, like maybe some people don't like him, but this one is like everybody knows this person. You know what I mean? And has been taught to have an opinion about them, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of wild.
But I think Diaz-Abaya does a really good job with what she's given, like with the work that she's
Totally.
given. And I think she's really
Yeah.
able to elevate this film and the screenplay just with her direction. And
Yeah.
I sort of want to get into the stylizing of this
Yeah, sure.
film
Yeah,
a little bit
let's.
because I think that's one of the strongest elements. I
Agreed.
really love the sweeping camera movements and a lot of oneers that are like showcasing action from different standpoints and the camera moving between different setups. And I think that is in contrast to the really still framing and blocking of Rizal and Taviel in his jail cell. And I think just making the flashbacks seem like a swooping adventure makes this feel very grand. Even though there's not a lot of actionable elements on screen, you don't see that much fighting on screen, but just massive blocking with people moving and walking around places and having different conversations. It's fascinating to see.
Yeah, it feels huge, even though there's usually only like a maximum of one horse on screen at a time. It feels like there are 20.
But she has these big crowd scenes which feel very grand. And I think her favorite camera move is like the push in onto a person that she uses a bunch of
incredible
times.
push-ins here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I was struck by the one with Leonor when she's like talking about how she has to get married, and then
oh my God,
there's like
her walking.
Plus, that's
and
a
then the
great
tilt
looking
up.
shot. And then the
Oh
tilt
my
up to the singing
God.
men, I guess. That's a great visual, even though it's not really important, but like it's a great visual to complement that idea, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it does, I think, elevate that idea of the past love that we don't really spend that much time on to kind of give it more import within the context of the film.
I want to highlight 2 push-ins that I really loved and tie a thread between these 3 push-ins. So the first is when Jose is at the meeting of the wealthy medical students in Spain.
Mm-hmm.
And he's starting to sort of be at odds with their sensibilities, and they're talking about him to him, and the camera kind of just starts pushing in from down by the side of the table up past the other guests and going closer to him, and he just looks uncomfortable. And the second one is after Rizal has been killed by the firing squad, the young man who had been cleaning his cell and brought him ham on Christmas, that push in on him, which is much more quick than the one with the rich gentleman. And then the jail cell worker just like looks up, and you see him think of what Rizal told him earlier, that education is not enough to make someone see what's right and moral. And Marilou Diaz-Abaya conjures that through that actor's expression without needing to cut to a flashback. But the thread I want to tie between all 3 of these push-ins is that these push-ins are all excellent at separating someone from their surroundings and putting them at odds with the people around them. Which, if you think about the technique itself, that's exactly what it does. It isolates someone and pushes away their surroundings. So it just feels like a super smart, effective, clear, grammatical way to use the push-in across the movie to tie a thread between Rizal's experience and the experience of people who suffer similar types of oppression to what he does.
You put it so well, Eli. And I think like
Cheers.
that just it just shows how textbook good of a filmmaker Marilou Diaz-Abaya is. It's just, you cannot fault the filmmaking behind it. It's just really on point most of the, if not all of the time that she's behind camera. And I think it's reflected in how she works on set. People say that she's well prepped, well studied before coming to set, and she knows exactly what she wants, and she just goes for it.
It feels like the kind of filmmaking that's kind of invisible.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I want to say workmanlike, but not in a way that feels too detracting.
Well,
but I don't have the right word for it.
At risk of also being reductive in a different way, I did think of Spielberg style which
Oh,
is
yeah.
similarly kind of invisible but distinctive and just very sharply utilized, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I would call that a good comparison. Like,
of course, 100%.
yeah, like I would say so. Like I think that's a good comparison. Like it's invisible but strong and always has the point of the scene in mind, right?
It's immersive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think all the house scenes made me think of Il Gattopardo.
I thought the same thing. Yes.
What?
Wilson's just like, what? The Leopard? The Italian film?
From Lucino Visconti.
That
yes.
big movie? Yeah, the house scenes all
Yes.
remind me of that because of production design and like the lushness of like how everything looks.
Mhm.
The
The
lighting.
mise en
choices.
scène
People
is,
dancing.
Yeah.
is incredible in this. Like you can really feel so much attention to detail was put into the
Yeah,
production
yeah,
design
Yeah.
of this movie.
I mean, you can tell this is a very expensive movie.
Yes.
You can tell, like even in what is this 480p.
To pile on the craft praise, the editing is so well timed. Like another form of seamlessness comes in the form of just cutting on the right moment and or waiting for Montano to give a little accent to his reaction to something and give it that extra breath of air. Makes it feel very alive and seamless.
I'm excited for you guys to watch the next film because it's sort of applying those really stellar filmmaking techniques into a story that is a little less conventional.
Sure.
And I think the other Ricky Lee screenplay is like pretty phenomenal. Yeah, not to hype it up too much, but it's really damn good.
Hype it up. It's very solid. It's very well made. I did enjoy it. Even though it's 3 hours and I watched it in multiple parts, it did feel like I could sink into it and I was engaged. Because I hadn't heard of Rizal, I was kind of holding out hope that he would survive in the end. And I feel like that speaks to some level of emotional engagement, right?
Yeah. I was a little scared that it would just be a bore to both of you.
I mean, it's been mixed for me. Yeah, even though if I respect a lot of the making of it, you know, like
Yeah.
no hate to MDA. Like I mean, like I think it looks good. It's just I think it's
Yeah.
tough for me with biopics. I generally find biopics kind of test my patience.
Yeah.
And I think this is really in that same camp. And it being 3 hours doesn't help it that much.
No.
I would say.
Perhaps a touch too long.
Oh, definitely. I would
A
cut
touch.
like a good 30 minutes from that.
Like easy, maybe even an hour.
But I'm glad that this is our introduction to Marilou Diaz-Abaya and also to Filipino
Can only go up
cinema.
in Wilson's rankings.
Of course. The only way is up. And stay tuned for our next episode where we will be talking about her most popular film on Letterboxd, Morale.
Cool.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review because that helps us keep making the show. Be sure to subscribe to us where you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. Keep up with Deep Cut on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Deep Cut Pod. Join us to talk about movies on our Discord server, to which you'll find a link in the description. Thank you to Justina Yam for our beautiful artwork. I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli.
Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.